Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's episode, we welcome Derrick King to the show. Derrick is the Director of Fixed Operations at ClearShift and is here to talk about the relationships in a service department. For me, this is a topic that we should probably be talking about more frequently because it drives positive communication in our dealerships and shops and really helps with retention. It helps with just people's general happiness. And I think this will be a really fun topic to talk about. So welcome to the show, Derrick.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Love what you guys are doing, what you're building, and I think I agree with you. It's a great and a needed topic to discuss. I think it's something that's kind of gone by the wayside. So excited to unpack it with you.
Derrick and I had a kind of pre-meeting or pre-podcast meeting to discuss everything that we're going to talk about today. And I told him at the time we could have just hit record on that and we would have been solid. It was such a good conversation. As you'll find out as we go through this podcast, Derrick's a pretty easy guy to talk to. So this should be a really, really fun episode. But I want to go back to the start, Derrick. How did you get into this industry?
Well, we talked about it a little bit, and I had just worked food service and retail for a long time. And one day I just got a wild hair and said, I want to work on cars. And so I had zero experience. My dad actually hated working on cars. It was the one thing he loathed. So I literally went and knocked on doors for shops. It took about 6-8 months, something along those lines, to get somebody to hire me, and got an opportunity at a shop. A guy took a shot and said, hey, I'll hire you and you can, work on cars part-time and you can parts drive for me part-time. And so I just went right into the fire. We talked about it. I think one of my favorite stories to tell is, my first oil change, I drained someone's transmission. I didn't even know they had plugs for transmissions, man. I'm looking at this thing going, what, that fluid looks red. That's different. And so, he took a big risk on me, but I learned a lot through that. And I think that's actually formed kind of my opinion on how I came up through some of those things, and I worked in that industry for 12 years and just as a technician worked into another shop, became a foreman, learned diagnostics, ASE certified, checked all the boxes and really, really enjoyed it. But I did also recognize some of the challenges within the industry. And, this is probably 15, 16 years ago, actually probably a little bit longer than that I actually had a wrench in my hand and I was doing something on day to day. And I took a shot and went to medical manufacturing. It was something along the lines of mechanical, an opportunity for me. Outside of that, the pay was steady, which I think all your audience, if there's technicians listening, they know, right? It's an up and down thing. I only worked at independents, never at a dealership. And so I worked into a process engineering group at that point and began to expand my skill set, my knowledge. A lot of the same stuff applies. Voltages got a lot more dangerous. Some jobs got a lot more dangerous in the manufacturing industry, but kind of expanded on those things. And, about 3.5, 4 years ago, was actually recruited by ClearShift ownership to come on and be on board to build with them alongside what they were doing. And they were really at that point a broker started company that was trying to build into something because they had a vision for transformation in industry that they think is good. And I could latch onto that vision because what I understood is automotive is an amazing workspace. Automotive is a great career path. It's a good trade. We talked about it a little bit. It's kind of AI proof to some degree because you can't have robots working on cars. They might be able to build them, but they're not going to be able to troubleshoot them. And so I caught on to that vision and really recognized the opportunity now on the flip side of this, from a director's point of view, is I can create a workspace that values technicians, that brings some of those things back in some of lends itself to the topic that we're talking about today. And so we've been here kind of ever since, and we're on a growth trajectory. So it's a lot of fun. We're learning a lot of things that I don't know. There's a lot of best practices that we don't know about. But it's kind of fun coming in with a fresh set of eyes, that you have the experience, but then also some other backgrounds and other industries that can feed into that. And I think there's an opportunity for us there.
Yeah. And I think one thing that is really interesting to me with your path and a lot of people that I see in our industry is that, starting off as a technician, a lot of times you feel like that's your ceiling, that you're not going to have opportunities beyond that. And being able to have these conversations over time and just getting to know people in our industry, I think nothing could be further from the truth, right? I think being a technician sets such a solid foundation for what you're going to do in your life, and having that technical ability and having that really that the ability to problem solve and critically think through problems is a skill set that there are so many different opportunities for you once you get that, kind of foundational piece of your toolbox, right? Like of your personal toolbox of what you can build off of. Was that similar in your regard? I mean, it sounds like you kind of, as you went through your journey, kind of added layers to your ability, and even going outside of the industry and bringing some of that knowledge back, kind of stacking those opportunities and that knowledge over time is really a powerful combination, isn't it?
It really is, so it takes some uncomfortability, but I think uncomfortability equals growth. And I don't think that people always look at that and recognize the same. We can equate it to working out. I have to increase the weight and the pressure that I'm putting on myself in order for the muscle fascia to stretch, in order to be able to develop and to grow. And so, funny story, kind of back up a little bit. I talked about transitioning out of that. And a lot of what was a motivating factor for me was I had told myself I would buy a house by a certain time. And the independent that I was working for, to give some context, when I was doing this is when manufacturers were offering massive rebates on trades. And so the government was pushing new car sales. And so then independents really suffer in that environment, right? Because people are not getting their cars worked on. I can push, pull, and drag it in, and I can get a ton of money for this and just buy a new car, low interest rates. And so, I noticed my paycheck starts dwindling. Why motivated? Because I said, I'm going to have a house by this time. And so that's what kind of drove me a little bit to look elsewhere. But I'll be honest with you, I had an opportunity at that same manufacturer 4 years before, and I went in and looked at it, and it scared me to death. And it kept me there. I was handlocked there for 4 years. Exactly like you said, I didn't feel like I could do necessarily anything else. I kind of pigeonholed myself in my own mind. I didn't value myself enough to recognize, no, I can go out and do something differently. And I'm fortunate enough in my life that I've had the right people pouring into me. And I think that's some of the topic that we, are going to touch on a little bit today, is having somebody that values you, that cares about you and wants to advance you, regardless of what that result is, whether it is you stay, employed with me here and you work for Derrick, or, you've learned some things, you got a skill set and you go out and you actually make an impact in something else. It's bringing back some of those things. But it is kind of scary. It does take a stretch. I would encourage people that are out there listening to, really hone in and listen to that part of it. And it's sometimes take a chance on yourself. Like I said, I could have been 4 years further advanced in that. And there's no regrets on my path and what that is. But I do know that, there's certain things economically, my life was different for 4 years. My growth trajectory was stunted a little bit. But you're absolutely right. It's a skill set. Can I look at a problem? Can I assess a problem? All those things can be taught, and we can learn those things, but we need to be continually challenging ourselves and creating an environment for that growth.
Such a good point. And I think that's advice that I give to technicians on a regular basis. And I think it doesn't just apply to technicians, but the importance of finding that right fit, and finding a business or a shop that's going to be really interested in your growth as an individual. And especially maybe with that entry level technician. That's really a good segue into everything we're going to talk about today. Is so often we look for the paycheck, right? And especially early on in our careers, I feel like you're going to hop around until you find, where you're getting paid a fair amount in your eyes. And that's what my experience was when I was younger. But what I found was that I was quick to the trigger on the money side, but not really thoroughly thinking through the opportunity as it related to getting in a place where somebody's going to actually care for me, right? And so every time that I made a move strictly because of money, I ended up miserable, right? Or if it was moving because of a title, I ended up not being very happy. And so what I tell my, I always kind of say this in what advice I would give to my younger self would be, look at the business a little bit deeper. When you go into that interview, ask good questions. And at some level, there are a lot of people that, and I was this way, where I was perfectly happy in a job, but it wasn't moving fast enough for me. And especially at an early age, that caused me to look, and that caused me to be, I don't know, just impatient. And it put me probably back. It set me back a little bit because I was so impatient. And I'm curious if that's something that you see as well. uh, in maybe younger generations, and maybe it's not just exclusive to younger generations.
I think it's probably across the board. We see it a little bit more in a younger generation. I think just society today is really kind of that microwave. I'm looking for that instant gratification. We look at everything, information's at our fingertips. We can Google anything, we can find anything we need. And that's true for the repair world. And that has a good place. But when it comes to something solid, there's one thing that we know, there's a principle that works in this world. It's seed, time, and then harvest. And so, if I go and I plant to seed and I see a little bit of growth and I'm really excited about it and I want to go put it somewhere else, I can't keep uprooting that seed and expect it not to suffer. We do set ourselves back sometimes when we're doing those things. And so recognizing the value of sitting in a position, we talked about it a little bit yesterday too, of, when we're talking about the value of relationships and the shop relationships and young people coming into shops and not knowing relationally how to enter that situation or how to enter that next step, with the recognition that there's a guy that's, been doing this for 30 years, that's grizzled, he's a veteran, and he can teach you everything you need to know. And actually sitting underneath him and stewarding that opportunity well may feel slow, may feel like you're not going to be the man or get the title or get the pay, but it's actually going to compound and accelerate your growth down the line. You getting upset with him or not understanding how relationally to sit in a seat, and just because you and I both know in automotive, nothing replaces time. I said
Yeah.
in my story, I went out and I literally just figured it out and I starved for 3 years. I made zero money. It cost me money to be there between tools and everything else. I don't know how I survived a cup of noodles and Mountain Dew. I don't know. It was just ridiculous, right? And, I think everybody's journey is that way. And there were guys that were coming out of school, they were going to WyoTech, and there's these great schools and great vocational programs. However, they come out of that program at 2 years and they're realistically just as green, because when what happens in the classroom does not mirror what happens in the real world. Now, if you can link those two, if you can get some opportunities for someone to be able to and be in both programs at the same time, it accelerates that growth. But nothing replaces the time and the scar tissue that you get just getting out there and getting your hands dirty.
Boy, is that such a solid point in general. If you're enjoying Beyond the Wrench, remember to follow and rate our podcast to help support the show. Right now, we would like to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Sonic Tools. Sonic Tools' direct distribution model offers affordable prices without sacrificing quality and service. Their goal is to increase the efficiency of every technician with the equipment solutions and the Sonic foam system that organizes quality tools in ways that award every technician with the opportunity to excel. Visit sonictoolsusa.com to learn more. One of our struggles as an industry, and I don't think this is a recent thing, I think this has been a problem for decades at this point, but sometimes the expectations of leadership in hiring a young person out of school and what they're expected to produce right off of the bat is unrealistic. And at least that's been my experience where, I think ASE, and I refer to this stat a lot, but ASE has a statistic that 42% of technicians leave the field within the first couple of years they're in it. And we're essentially eating our own. And I think a lot of it comes down to the impatience of industry in allowing these young people time to develop. And, I point to, and I've shared this story before, but my business partner is a CPA, and he said he went to 4 years of college, then grad school, and then came out still entry level, right? Still doing entry level things, doing auditing, doing things that maybe experienced accountants didn't want to do. And when he came to our industry, he was just like, oh my goodness, they go to school for 9 months or maybe 2 years, and they're expected to come out and be rock stars. And I said, that's been our history, right? Like, it's just, we produce billable hours and we expect them to produce right off the bat. And I think it's a huge killer to our industry.
Yeah. And I love what you said there, really, because it goes back to the point of valuing people more than valuing the profit. So everything's an investment. We're, as shop owners, as people that are industry leaders, we're looking for a return on investment. And that makes sense. You have to make money to stay in business, but there is an expected investment to understand that there is a growth and a maturation process that we responsibly have to steward with them, that we have to walk alongside those things. A good way to put it is, you mentioned you have children. You want your kids to know how to do laundry. And so you're going to teach them, but that might cost you a washer or a dryer one day. right? But you don't value that washer or dryer more than you value your child. Your love and your concern for that, it's going to go beyond those things. And so we kind of have to look at that again, where I don't value the dollar more than I value the person. Now, if
Mm.
they continue to fail, there's a noble failure, right? That's a good term to say, is like, it's a part of a learning process. If it's repeated, if it's chronic, then it's a problem, and you kind of address that separately, because there's going to be individuals and there'll be people that are there that the industry's not for them. They're going to find out that it didn't work. They don't have the retention. It does take a certain skill set. I mean, we talk about it a lot. I hire for cultural over skill set all day long. Now, master technicians, you've never had a wrench. You could be the coolest dude in the world. I can't hire you, right? You still have to have a skill set, but there has to be a recognition of where that is. There's some delineation there, and we just have to be willing to make that investment. And sometimes it is, and understanding that if I invest in you today, in 5 years from now, the payback for the company and in general, our relationship is going to be much, much greater.
I love your viewpoint on that, right? Hire for culture, hire for the right person rather than the technical ability. And I think what you find a lot of times, especially in a dealership where you do have maybe a few more opportunities than the independent, just, you can go to sales, you can go to parts, you can do, some different things. I've seen some failed technicians become outstanding parts people. I've seen some failed technicians become outstanding salespeople. I'm a failed technician that became I think a pretty good manager. And I think when you look at, if you can have the patience to take a step back and look at the person as that individual, right? Not have your, past history in your mind of one particular interaction with a different employee, just because everybody's so different. But if you can look at that person and say, hey, you know what, he or she's a pretty good person, they just aren't good technically, maybe there's a different fit for them, or maybe it is time to have that honest conversation with them about maybe your passion's not here, and that's okay. Like, we're going to help you find that right career path for you. And hey, I've got a friend that's in marketing, maybe that's a better path for you. I've got a friend that's in owns an electrician company, maybe you go that route, like just trying to maybe help them. And I had read somewhere before, even if it's not a fit for you, you should work to love them out the door
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's true too. The way somebody leaves is the way they enter the next thing. And so, do you send them off well? One of the best managers I ever had in my life, what he came to me and said is listen, my job is to remove roadblocks to your success. Now, we have a job to do today. So you have a job role and you have an assignment and responsibility. I need you to give me your all in this. But if there's other things that you want to do outside of this, or there's other tracks that you want to take, what other training that you want to get, I want to help you get those things. And I think, what we failed to do is we continue to just look at the bottom line, the dollars. What does that look like? How can I maximize my ROI? How can I maximize what I'm making each bay, each hour, each technician? How can I maximize profit? And we begin to value that over the technician, over relationship. And I think actually systemically we're shooting ourselves in the foot, because we talked about it a little bit yesterday too and touched on it, is that actually holds an impact to the consumer, because now we're talking about a culture, and a culture will spread out. And so when you talk about how that interaction is with now your final customer, are you trying to serve them and serve them well and starting to do that internally? Or is there turmoil? Because people know, they know if they can trust, they just know if there's something authentic in there. And so, there's a lot of opportunity for us in that workspace to take a step back, value those things, make the right investments so that we can get the results that we want. The rest of the stuff will take care of itself. People are way more significant and more valuable than the dollar. You didn't start this, WrenchWay, you didn't start everything that you're doing because you were trying to make the most money. You saw an opportunity in an industry to say, hey, let's bring some value back to this and let's make a transformation and make a change. And that's why I'm actually really excited to be partnered with you and even a part of this conversation today. It's amazing.
Well, that's hugely flattering, right? That is truly why we did it in the first place. Now, going back to your point about needing to make money in a business, sometimes I feel like it's hard for that technician that's out there to truly understand that, right? And a lot of times it can be perceived as, hey, your posted labor rate is significantly higher than what my wage is. And I think there's a lot of opportunity as we talk about communication to be able to walk people through why it's important to make a profit, and why there is a difference between your paycheck and what our posted labor rate is. And I see this comment from technicians all the time on Facebook that, 50 years ago, technicians got half the labor rate. Like, that was the deal. They got half the labor rate. And I think what they're missing is how much service departments have evolved over the years, right? And the technology needed, the insurance needed to keep a business going. But I think a lot of it comes down to a failure on leadership's part to actually be transparent and actually explain what's going on in a service department. And I'm interested to hear from your perspective, how much of an impact does your service department or the employees in your service department understanding financials have on maybe streamlining that conversation a little bit, or making that a little less you versus us?
No, 100%. I think a lot of it, to your point, is transparency. That's actually something that we talk about a lot, in our company internally, as we talk about just the transparency that, I mean, it's the name, ClearShift, right? And it's not a pitch for ClearShift, but it's a pitch for an idea that let's pull back the curtains on some of this, because there's nothing magic about it. And most of it, I think guys get this idea that the math is linear, that it's just going to be, these two things go. And now there's a bigger delineation between what I make and what they're making. And they don't recognize, well, there's, EPA considerations, there's insurance considerations, there's rent, there's your tax, there's your insurance, there's all these things. And they're just not educated. And I think in the process of caring for the person, caring for the technician, educating them on what that business model actually looks like, because they'll buy into that, because then they recognize that, hey, they're trustworthy. They're not just trying to line their pockets off of my back. Because I think that's a lot of what happens to guys. They have a bad day. They don't have a bad pay period. A car beats them up. They don't flag as much as they wanted to flag. And so it's a little bit more short-sighted, but it's not really their fault, because they're not tasked with the day-to-day of running a business. They don't know all those extra things. The same thing in a detail department. I provide all the chemicals, all the supplies. So when they talk about that, well, they actually now understand the value is I don't have to bring my own polisher. I don't have to bring chemicals. I don't have to do these things. And so that's why my pay is where my pay is, and I think too, having that conversation, because at that point you're building relationship and then building value, like into who they are and what they actually do for you. Because I think, and that's one of the biggest things I think, is guys can tell when you're fluffing them. Like they know if you're disingenuine. There's people that will watch many of your podcasts. They'll talk to you. They'll know whether or not Jay is who he says he is. And I think that we have to be intentional in our relationships with the guys on the ground that are actually doing the work. In manufacturing, I seen it a lot where they didn't value the people that were actually on the production lines. And you talk about one of the biggest mistakes that somebody can make from a leadership perspective. Now, there'll be people that are grumbling, but use your management mindset or your engineering mindset to say, well, this is a good idea. This is a complaint. But like take the voice of the technician. I love the name of the survey, you guys, the voice of the technician. Come down, see what's going on with them, and then be able to help alleviate some of that. Because most of them would fully understand it. If they had all the pieces and they could see it and you could lay it out, then they're going to go, oh, okay, this makes sense to me. And then now you're inviting them to participate in the process. Because I'm asking you to come here. I'm asking you to spend time away from your family, from your kids, from anything you want to do on your own free time. And I'm saying, hey, come spend more time with me. And I'm going to put a value on that time. Well, I think there's more value than just the dollars. I think there's a way to communicate to people that they're significant and that you matter to me. I need you for more than just repairing cars. I want you here because I like you, because you bring value to who we are.
That is such a great way to state that. And when I look at it, as cliche as it sounds, it does come down to trust, right? Do I trust that what you're telling me is the truth? Do I trust that when you're giving me that transparency, that you're not just giving me the stuff that is going to put me at, kind of put me at arm's length until you need me, right? Like, I feel like so much of it does come down to trust. And with that technician manager relationship, with that technician owner relationship, if the trust isn't there, a lot of times I feel like the trust isn't there because there isn't proactive communication. There's not a lot of times, especially in a bigger store, it's hard to know your employees' families' names, right? Like like there's just so much of it comes down to, do I trust what you're telling me or not? And I'm going to make a reaction based on whether I do or don't trust you.
No, 100%. And I think a lot of it, what I've learned and what I coach in my teams is we're a servant based leadership model. So that's kind of an inverted pyramid, right? On that. And so we're serving top down. And within that, what guys find is now they can get yoked to your vision. They can get behind what you're doing. So, my shop foreman is a guy, he's fully taken care of. And if he goes and he gets on a car with someone else and he does something on the back half while the guy does something on the front half, it's a win for us because we've gotten more things out the door, right? It's an interesting balance between, we need volume of vehicles getting through recon, but we need customer cars. So we're balancing all those things, but he's helping that man earn more money for his paycheck. And I take care of the shop foreman. Now, here's what happens. That guy knows I got more flat rate hours on my paycheck because my shop foreman came in, stepped up, helped me out. He'll go to battle with them all day. So when the tough conversation needs to come, he's going to know, well, he has a heart for me. He cares. He's not just coming at me to blast me because of a performance issue, but he's also going to know maybe that tough conversation comes as like, hey guys, we're really behind and we need to maybe do a little extra overtime. We get maybe come in on a Saturday. They're more likely to do that. Now, it's not done to trick them into doing those things, but it's building a genuine relationship. These guys actually like each other. It's important to me. We getting to the point of an organization where I can't know everybody super individually, but I still try to be very intentional. Yeah, hey, let's go to dinner. I want to know your wife's name. Exactly what you said. It's just that idea but it's because I actually care. It has nothing to do with, it's a checklist kind of thing. I have a genuine interest. And I would prefer that, if you can come here and be better and actually get launched into something that you're better at or more suited for, man, I would love for you to be able to take some skill sets and take that somewhere else and go impact something. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create significance.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics says technicians make around $46,000 a year. Does that sound like BS to you? We thought so too. At WrenchWay, we work with some of the best shops and dealerships across the country, and we've seen technicians make a lot more than that. So we decided to gather our own data. We're excited to announce the launch of our new online technician pay tool. You can now search technician pay by industry, shop type, location, and experience. We've already had over 3,000 technicians submit their pay data anonymously. You can explore the pay data and even submit your own data anonymously at wrenchway.com/pay. Thank you for your continuous support of WrenchWay as we strive to promote and improve automotive and diesel careers. We couldn't do it without you. Have you ever worked in or seen a shop where maybe leadership has said those right things, but maybe their actions didn't reflect it?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think that's actually probably the case for most of them. So I don't want to be as bold to say everybody's doing terrible. There are people out there that are doing this well, that really understand this, that are going after this from the right perspective and the right heart. But I think, yeah, there are people that just essentially mail it in and they said, this is the company line and what we need to do, but that's really not their motives and intentions. And guys know that. It comes back to that authenticity. But you can see that. You can diagnose that pretty quickly when you walk into a shop, because you can kind of tell the tone and the feel generally of that. But it doesn't promote growth. What they don't realize, they're actually stunting their own growth, right? Is now they're not investing in their people. And the minute you stop investing, just like your 401k, I've put $100,000 into this thing and I'll never put another dollar in. You have capped your returns. So sometimes, like we talked about it, is, we talked about job shadowing, and you're kind of like, we went through 4 people before we got the one good guy or the one good gal that is in this. Some people would look at that as a failure. You look at it as a success, because you go, well, this is exactly what we were trying to do. Now, had you stopped at number 2, try number 3, you never realized number 4, right? And number 4, who knows what that nets you down the line.
I think that goes back to that thinking over prior relationships or prior interactions that you've had, and especially as you get older in your career, you have a lot more experience to call from. And sometimes that isn't necessarily a good thing, because maybe that's stuck in your memory that, you know, I hired somebody from X school and they were terrible, so I'm never going to hire anybody else from that school again. And I think you really, you set yourself back when you do that, because you're not going into things with an open mind. And I think, to one of my best friends in the world, he owns equipment dealerships. And one of the things that he does in interviews is that he won't even read the resume until after they interview. And the reason he does it that way is because he doesn't want to have a flawed uh, viewpoint of this new person that he's meeting prior to reviewing the resume. And I thought that was such a unique way of going about it, because you're almost forcing yourself to get to know the person a little bit before you read through their accolades.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea of how you evaluate somebody, and we talked about this a little bit and touched on it. Is where there's a deficit of the program. It's not a young man or a young woman's fault coming out of school that they don't know things. I think as an industry, we have an opportunity to kind of repair what that actually looks like, because it seems like there's a big disconnect between, you know, what is being taught and what's actually needed. And there's some area for improvement in there, you know. And so kind of the same thing is, I can't evaluate every kid that comes out of a particular school against the one kid that we hired that couldn't show up on time and, you know, showed up wrinkly and all of these different things. No, it's not every kid. And that's not every employee that you bring in the door. So I really love that perspective. Might be actually something worth giving a shot a couple of times just to kind of see what that actually looks like. I think you get some pretty good visual cues when you're talking to technicians as to whether or not, you know, they got soft hands and smell like vanilla lotion. It's probably not a guy. He's not trying to be out on the floor producing for you, but you know, he comes in dirty, callous, and have some conversation. So, but I love that idea, because again, it goes back to more of, is this person the right fit for what we're trying to do? You know, we talk about this. I say this in my interviews a lot. This is like a marriage. So it can't be just a one-sided thing that you come in and you work for a company and produce. That is an element. That is a reality. You know, we talk about it's having to earn a bay or earn the right to have one bay, two bay, whatever, and produce on a certain level. But it has to work the other way around too. I have to serve and meet your needs, you know. So if we say we are who we are and we value people, then actually work falls below family. Work falls below some other things. Do we have an opportunity as an industry to kind of change that narrative? Absolutely, because I don't think as a whole we're grinding guys, you know. And I think there's a lot of dudes out there that have an amazing skill set, have been doing something for a long time. They're just been wore down, you know what I mean? And I'd love to see people get passionate and fall in love with their first love again, fall in love with working on cars, fall in love with the thing that drew them to that. Because I don't think that you have a 20-year career in this industry if you didn't love it.
It's so, it's so true. And you had a quote yesterday when we talked that you said you fall in love with the industry over time. And I think that's really true for probably any industry. But as you, the longer you stay with it, I think the more appreciation you have for things, but it can backfire as well, right? Like, we've had several conversations with technicians that, you know, maybe they're with the wrong shop for a long time, or they've been to multiple shops that haven't really treated them in their eyes as good, right? And I think it's funny, because I think different people take that differently. I've definitely fallen in love with this industry more and more each and every year that I'm in it. And I've been in it since I was 9 years old, right? Like, since a kid, I was in this industry. And there's others that have a similar path. And I think at times you grow to be frustrated with it. And even for myself at times, maybe I'll get frustrated with the lack of progression in the industry, or the fact that we still have some of the issues that we had 30 years ago and that we haven't made strides. But what I think has really kind of stoked my fire is, with the WrenchWay side, being able to see that there are shops that are changing. And you know, I look at what you're doing with ClearShift, and it's a different way of going about it, right? It's a different mindset. It's a different, it's just a different feel. And I give you and all of the team at ClearShift a huge kudos, because that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to go in and try to change opinions of the industry. It's not easy to go in and actually do the stuff that a lot of people talk about. And uh, for me, just seeing maybe a fresh perspective on it is so refreshing in general. And I want you to talk through that, because I think the viewpoint of your team is different than a lot.
Yeah, and I think going back to your original point, understanding that there's certain things flourish in certain environments, and so being okay and understanding that. Sometimes you could have the best person, the best intentions, could be your best friend, but he may not be the best person to come and work for you because of the environment. And so it's creating that environment for growth. I recognize not everybody that comes through my doors is going to be the most flourishing environment for them, right? Maybe we need to send them out with love and send them out with care and get them connected where they need to be connected. We talked about it a little bit when we do a biblical based business model, right? And so that goes back to just basically serving people. That is the idea, and that's the opportunity that we see within the industry where so much has been driven towards profit, so much has been driven towards money, all of these other things. That became the goal. Well, when you shift that focus and you say, no, that's not what it is. Let's get back to caring for people, because that's ultimately what this is about. And sometimes, yeah, that comes at an expenditure. Sometimes that comes at a cost. But I can tell you the rest of this works itself out, because at that point, you're getting people to understand, because I'm genuinely interested in serving people. And so why would you not want to come back to that? If you've got, I mean, people talk about all the time, they'll die going to the same mechanic, right? They hope that their mechanic outlives them so that they don't ever have to find a guy. When Fred is 75 and retires, Tom's like, I don't know what to do. This is terrible. And so, I think the opportunity for us as industry professionals and industry leaders is to change that narrative and to rebuild some of that trust. And again, it goes back to, I care about who gets the keys. I care that this is going to go to someone and it's going to carry their family, and they're going to go to soccer games and softball games, and they're going to go have birthday parties, all of these things. And if you can look past some of that. So really, success for us is really just the vehicle that we can communicate our message. In a biblical model, people are the goal.
I love that message. And I think one of the complaints that we hear most of the time from technicians is that they don't feel respected. They don't feel like they are treated as an equal in a lot of a lot of scenarios. And it can be, I'll give you a scenario or a story from our own family shop that just recently happened that I thought was really interesting. We have this technician that's he's been around for a long time. He's really good. He's really solid. Uh, Not the most personable guy in the world, but has a good heart. And he went to the service manager about a week ago and had said, I got something on my mind. And he's like, okay, what's going on? And my dad still in the shop every single day, and they grew up together, right? So he has known my dad for a long time. And he said, it's been 3 days since Dan stopped by and said hi to me. I saw him over talking to another tech. And it's crazy to me that just in those 3 days, that, and it wasn't intentional by any means, but my dad had been out of the shop working on some personal projects for a couple days, and then missed saying hi to him on the third day. And that really affected him, right? Like that made him think that maybe he wasn't important or something along those lines. And at first I was a little bit taken aback by it, right? Like I was like, really? Like 3 days? Like that's and I'm just being fully transparent here. Like in my eyes, I was like, okay, that seems a little needy. That seems a little needy. And then when I started thinking about it more and more, and my first thought was to react to it, right? Like, okay, like let's put an end to this. And then I took a step back and I was like, it's really true, right? Like he respects my dad a lot. And the fact that he hadn't stopped by and said hi, it goes back to probably a credit to my dad, because he's done it for so many years where he does stop by and say hi and have a conversation with them. And so, it's one of those scenarios where my initial thought was to react. and react negatively. And when I took a step back and thought about it and thought about it through his shoes, I was like, oh yeah, like that makes total sense. And I would probably be pissed too. So like it was one of those things where it was, it took me a minute to think through it, but then it's those little detail things that I learned growing up from my dad that I think are really, really important when you're trying to build those relationships.
I think you're 100% correct. You talk about it's perception is reality. It's not my favorite thing. I don't like that saying very much, but it's a very true statement. If I'm waiting in line to check out at the store and I thought that it took 5 minutes, but the clock ticked 30 seconds off, it still took 5 minutes. There's a reality to that. That's how people see things. And I think that's where the challenge is because everybody has different levels of communication. My position as a fixed ops, you've got guys that are making 18 an hour and you've got six-figure guys, and then you've got everything in between that. And so, man, talk about just the different levels of communication. And then how do we effectively as an organization or as a shop manager or owner understand that and build value into those relationships? Because for this guy, it's the end of the world, 3 days, and he didn't say anything to me. He must be mad at me. There must be something wrong. And that's absolutely not true, right? He's just distracted, didn't think about it. Nothing is going on. And so understanding and actually caring for those relationships, and I think when you begin to recognize too, these guys are going home with that information. They're going home with this weighing on their shoulders. How miserable was he for 3 days? What did, I don't know if he's married or not, but what did his wife say? Then you begin to place a little bit more value and importance on just those little things. This is an industry, you have to have adversity quotient. We talk about EQ and IQ, but AQ is the thing we should talk about a little bit more too. That it does. Like you just need to have a little bit more of that in general, but it doesn't mean that somebody's feelings or their thoughts or that relationship should suffer because of that. I think, we talk about our own shop. This was something that just really, it was a blessing to me to hear. We had a guy come from another dealership group, a large dealership group, and he had done similar type of work. He had done some stuff for us, kind of sublet, right? We were kind of still on the uptick and growing. And so we liked the guy and we wanted to bring him over. We just didn't have some of the stuff he needed at that point. Like there was, functional things, health insurance, some of that kind of stuff. I got a couple of kids. That doesn't really work for me. So we get those things in place, and then he kind of catches on to the vision and comes over and he takes a shot on us, right? We sold him on what we're trying to do. And he's like, you know what? I've got 12 years here, but okay, I believe you guys. His wife actually came in and said, you know what? Since he started with you guys, he's just different. When he comes home, it's different. He interacts with his family differently. So there's just some things like that. And that's what I found out. So when we talk about, when you're asking about me personally, what I got fired up about, it's not cars. My phone doesn't ring because people are super excited and things are going super well. My phone rings because some kind of problem exists and it needs some solve, and it's bubbled up to the top because the team's having trouble with it. And so, people are like, do you love cars? Yeah, I mean, I do to a degree, but a lot of that, if I was to be honest with you, is just a headache. I found out that I love people, and now we have an opportunity out of that love and out of that concern and that care to build something with that. I got fired up about that. I mean, that's awesome to hear, right? That somebody's wife now is saying, hey, the trajectory of our family life has changed. So why not try to create that? I mean, we all understand that we got to go to work and we got to it's a fact of life. So can we create something in that is actually becoming a better benefit, that's actually speaking a better message? I think so, 100%.
Man, you talk about the impact that you have on people, and I truly do think that's the kind of stuff that changes your day as a leader, right? When you hear those types of stories and you see that you're making an impact, so that maybe some of those more challenging days are worth it, right? When you hear that somebody's home life had changed, and you hear that from their spouse, so you're not hearing that from them directly. It's so heartwarming to hear something like that, because I do think there are a lot of stories that we have in our industry that don't get told and oftentimes are overlooked for some of the negative stuff that happens. And I just think hearing that, it helps give hope to others, right? It helps give hope that there are good shops out there. There are other good businesses out there that can treat their people well. I want to go back to that relationship again with service manager, specifically service manager to technician relationship. And in your journey, you started off as a technician. And one of the things that I say quite a bit is that we don't do a great job as an industry of kind of pointing out that technician that might want to move up, right? Or they want to move into a different role in their future. And a lot of times we'll take that really, really good technician and try to make them fit into a service manager or into some other type of role without giving them any real guidance or training on how to make that shift. You kind of went through that journey from technician to leadership. And I'm interested to hear if it took you some time to understand that you weren't in your bay anymore, right? And that when you find out that it is people that you love more than cars, that was that a natural thing for you, or did that take time to understand that, hey, I need to go have conversations with my people, I need to, my job is to help grow those relationships? Did it take some time to really grasp that?
I think so. Anytime you move into a leadership role, so anytime you kind of progress through some ranks, there's always a little bit of an attrition process. There's always the maturation that happens. And so you're trying to figure out, who am I in this? So somebody's recognized you and said, hey, you're kind of earmarked as somebody who has leadership capabilities. Now, just because you're earmarked for that doesn't mean that you're going to crush it. You might not even want to do it. It may not be your personality, it may not be your thing, right? So a lot of times you look at people and you're like, I think there's a lot of technicians and shops out there that are like, this dude's amazing and the way he performs is awesome, and I just want to replicate him. And that guy's like, I just want to come to work and, I want to work 60 hours this week. I don't want to mess with 2 bays over. I don't care what's going on in this bay. I'll help them if they got a question, but like, this is where I want to be. So you kind of have to begin to understand a little bit about that. For myself, we talked a little bit about, I had an old crusty guy that, like, he hated everybody. I mean, it was crazy. He was mean, but he liked me, and he kind of took me under his wing. And so he taught me some of those things. And that's really what I began to recognize in that season of my life, was he was implanting in me a skill set that allowed me to surpass some of the people around me, fairly or unfairly, maybe because he didn't want to share the information because he just didn't like anybody else. But for whatever reason, he did. And I mean, I value that, again, coming in kind of just as completely green with knowing nothing and kind of walking through the stages and that whole process. It was very interesting to me how you do that. But one of the things I eventually had to do was I had to just actually agree with that about myself. In other words, I had to say, yes, you're a shop foreman. Yes, you're a leader in this environment, because at that time I'm younger, and now I'm in charge of guys that had certifications from the year I was born. And, for whatever reason, it's not mine to know one way or another why they didn't rise to the top of the ranks. I mean, there's varying skill levels. We can that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can kind of skip in this conversation, but you have to agree with that, and then you have to begin to act on that. And I think just like the industry itself, when you kind of rise into a leadership role, when you kind of rise into something, there's that feeling out process that nothing really beats time in the saddle. Are there relationships that I torched along the way? Probably. People that I offended along the way? Probably. Are there people that I did really well with? Yes, absolutely. So it's kind of going back and looking at that. It's the same thing, but with people in that sense. And like, so right now I'm far enough removed from things that I just know the right questions to ask, right? You and I, we don't have wrenches in our hand every day. I know enough. I'm staying abreast on the technology. If you want me to go out and fix that, probably not the best move for anybody. I realized when we actually had first started, I'll kind of share this with you. We had just one technician. And so we're just behind, and I'm like, well, I can do this. And I found out real quick that was not a true statement. Like, I'm horribly inefficient at this. It made me value what the guys that are in there doing it every day. You're 12, 15 years removed from it, and you're like, well, I'm not, I'm not what I once was. But, it's one of those things. I think it's learned. Some of it's modeled, but I don't think we have a lot of good models in the industry either, to be honest with you, because I don't think we train guys relationally what that looks like. We talked about how I think that would be a great class for young men and women coming out of school. How do I carry myself? How do I walk into a shop humbly to be able to receive that information and soak all those things up? Because so many times there's just a lot of people are kind of puffed up with some of that stuff. And so they're ready to be offended. And like, we just need to get that out the door. Let's build some trust. Like, I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm not picking on you. I might ask a question because I've missed things. I've missed big things. You've probably, the more you've worked on cars, the more you've done, you've probably cost a company money. I have. I've cost money in, in the position I'm in today as I learn and grow into this. So, but
Yeah.
creating an environment where, failure is okay, where we can learn from those things. And so, it took time for me, but I think the biggest step, if anybody's out there looking at that, is kind of begin to see yourself as that and look for opportunities to build relationship in the guy in the bay next to you with the service rider. Maybe pick the service rider that you struggle with and that you don't like that much, and try to find a way to find common ground, because that's where we're going to begin to build the mesh that repairs some of the brokenness.
You hit on something that I think was a light bulb moment for me. And it's been a long time since I've gone and worked in a shop atmosphere. I still like tinkering on the side and like tinkering with cars. But if you remember the show Undercover Boss, I almost feel like our industry could do so much better if we took some tips from that show and maybe send that fixed ops director or that service manager back out in the shop for a couple days and have them work alongside the technicians to remind themselves of how talented these people are, and honestly remind themselves of how maybe they can't do the job anymore, or maybe they never could, right? And I think that's where my love of technicians came from, was just being a failed technician early in my career and growing up around technicians, thinking that, I watch them every day, this is a really easy job because I've watched them every day. And then when you actually get into it and start doing it, you're like, I suck at this. But I think being able to just get yourself out there and maybe get dirty a couple days, or really use it as an opportunity to reacclimate with your team. Looking back to that show, it's hilarious because it was such a true reflection of most businesses. When you get into a point of leadership, oftentimes you forget those little things that are so hard. And you forget that when somebody on a hot day pulls their car into a dealership or into the shop in general, and you throw it up on the hoist and it's 100 degrees outside and it's the burning, scalding oil coming out of it splashes up and hits you, like, that's painful. And I think we forget about that at times. And looking back to that show, it just kind of dawned on me while you were talking, that might be just an excellent way to help you kind of deepen those relationships.
100%. Manufacturing understands that. They'll go down, and so it's Japanese culture, and then some of kind of the principles they've taken and applied that a lot to manufacturing, and we brought that to America. One of the things they talk about is a Kaizen event, and it really just means go where the work happens. And I think that we have an opportunity as an industry, as fixed op directors, as whatever, to get out and get on the floor, because we're trying to reproduce manufacturing, right? We're trying to get something in and out of a bay, and we're trying to make it at maximum efficiency, whatever that is. And so, man, you know how much my eyes are open if I just spend time in a shop for an hour or 2 hours, or if I say I'm going to commit half a day and I'm just going to observe what happens. I'm not here to criticize, not here to say anything. I'm not going to draw conclusions very quickly. I'm just going to just observe what those things are and then begin to understand the why. You'll not only benefit as a shop owner, as a manager, but you'll benefit just in general as a company, because you'll be able to identify, because there's probably some stuff in there that your guys are like, hey, I do this every day, and this is still the same point of contention or frustration. Manufacturing, you'd see it a lot, where there's the person that's been 30 years on a flow line, and they've been assembling these cassettes, and they're like, I've been talking about this for 15 years and nobody's listened to me. And all of a sudden, now your scrap numbers go way down, your production goes way up, whatever that looks like. And so, but again, I think also twofold purpose, it actually serves relationship, because you're now communicating that you care. So don't go down there with this idea that I'm here to fix all the things. Go down here with like, I have no idea what's going on. Because that's actually probably a more true statement. Sure, you know the numbers, you know the financials, you know all of this, that, and the other thing, but that's not why you're there, right? Go down there to serve them, to see what their day's actually like, and you'll find opportunities in there, and it'll benefit both sides.
That is, if you take nothing from this podcast but that advice right there, that is really, really solid advice. Because, again, going back to my own experience, I remember doing that in a shop that I was leading, and this I had a tech that was kind of complaining about something very simple. And what that simple thing was that this particular shop only had one set of oil filter wrenches, and they were at the other side of the shop. So every time he was doing an oil change, he was walking all the way over to the other side of the shop, grabbing that oil filter wrench, coming all the way back, and going back to Kaizen. That's such a perfect thing to bring up, because you're trying to eliminate that wasted time and that waste of that person having to walk all the way across the shop for a $10 tool, right? So easy fix. You get the $10 tool and put it next to each bay so that they don't have to go out of their way. You're causing additional stressors for them having to walk that far. And so little things that you can learn by just reacclimating yourself in the shop can go a long way. And if you go out to listen and not to tell, I think you're gonna gain a lot of ground.
Yeah, that's such a great example too, because really what's unspoken in that is you've created happiness for your employee. You've created ease of work. So now they can make more money, which if they're making more money, you as the shop owner, manager, director, whatever, you've made more money. That $10 investment now might have worth $200 to you in a day. So and again, that's not, you just can't look at it through that end goal though. You have to have this idea of listening. And I think that's a big opportunity that we have in this across the board, from school programs on up. We have an opportunity to kind of just sit down and actually listen to the people that have been doing the work. And I think there's been a disconnect in that. I think America went through this shift where, manufacturing was just a dictated down kind of a thing. And so it's become so process oriented, but we've forgotten that people run processes. That's a powerful thing when you think about it. Yes, you need a process, but it's a person that runs it.
Yeah, and I think there's so much value in what you're saying there, because if you go and say you go through a Kaizen process, or you get a business coach and you're trying to implement more process, and you're trying to maybe shove that process down the throat of the people that work in your shop, yet they don't know why you're doing it, or maybe they don't think the process is right in the first place. I think you're going to fight a battle there from the start, where if you kind of lay down some foundational elements, you're just going to be, it's going to run smoother. Everybody's going to be happier. Not everybody's always going to be happy. I don't want to paint that picture, but at least you're communicating and going back to the core of why we're having this discussion in the first place. You're trying to drive communication. You're trying to build relationships, and something as simple as putting a process in place can be something that can add to that relationship.
Yeah, I think and I love what you said right there, because a lot of it goes back to connecting to the why. That's actually most people, they just want to know. I just want to know the why. If I don't feel informed, because otherwise it feels dictated down. You might have the best idea in the world, but let's be honest, you would be honest with me and I'd be honest with you and say there's things I've done that were not the right thing. And somebody could have raised their hand and said something, but because they didn't feel like they had, either the levity or the relationship with me. So you're building equity in those relationships, because if I can get you to buy into the why, or if I can explain this to you, you're willing to walk this out with me. Now we're going on an adventure together. It's not, I'm dictated this adventure. I've been told to go to war. It's no, we're going to war together. Come alongside with me. Let's discover this. This may be awesome, maybe way better than you ever expected. And that's what I hope that the end result is. Or it may be a train wreck that I never saw coming. But at least you know that I was in it with you. You're not accountable to it. And I appreciate the efforts that you put into it. And I think, I think that's one of the biggest things that you could actually do. If you were to say to anybody, to a really, really good step one is just have a shop meeting, get guys together and say, this is who we are and why we do what we do. In other words, everything that we do needs to actually connect to our vision. Right. And so if we've got this vision of this is how we want to impact this industry, this is our goals financially, otherwise, guys will love that you share that with them, because now they're going to be tied to a goal. And then the culture piece of that is, how are you going to operate? What does your day-to-day look like in order to reach that? And I think more often than not, you give them the ability to participate, and they're going to want to participate because everybody likes to win. Everybody has some competitive streak in them. And so how do you just turn that around to say, come alongside me and let's chase this goal together? And that's where I think where we miss it a lot. That's where we as managers miss this a lot, where we don't take that time to give them that opportunity and recognize. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's okay for them to see you fail. Now,
I do too.
how you handle that,
great point.
you have to be transparent about it. Right? You can't you can't hide behind closed doors and then just, it kind of is what it is. And then you're gone and you're at the next store, you're the next thing, but you come down and talk it and just own it. Right. You're really, really quick to let them know when their failures occur or the deficits that are there. So let's be transparent. I mean, I'm not infallible by any means.
I think that vulnerability can be very, very powerful. And I could not agree with you more. As you're saying that, I'm like, I love that approach, because then it shows that you're not perfect, or that you're not claiming to be perfect, because I've seen that scenario in shops too, where you have a leader that, oftentimes comes across as, I don't make mistakes, I'm perfect. And meanwhile, in the shop, they're talking a different story, and they're, it again comes down to removing that barrier between leadership and technicians in a way that you are truly growing authentic relationships. And everything that we've talked about today has been so great, right? Like I love the communication discussion, because it's really easy to talk about. It's really hard to do. And I think all of the advice and the tips that you gave us over the course of this hour have been very, very powerful. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. It was such a fun conversation.
I'm super excited about what you guys are doing. Again, I'm more than honored. We had a couple of conversations leading up to this, and I told you, I said, I would love to connect with you and even meet you for a meal at some point, just because of what you're doing. And I just appreciate your heart, appreciate what you're doing, and we're happy to be partnered with you, happy to be supporting what that is. And again, it's just truly honored to be. I don't take it lightly when somebody invites you on and says, hey, come be a part of this. We would like to do that. And so, I hope it served you well. I hope it served your audience well, but man, it's been an absolute blessing to us.
Same here. It's same, everything that you said, same goes for you. Love your outlook on the industry and how you as a business are really approaching this. I think it's part of the solution to the problem industry wide. And I think there are a lot of people that can look at what you guys are doing and make some changes within their operations to really get our industry in a better place. So an absolute pleasure to have you on. Hope we can do it again.
Yep. Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you liked this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, did you know Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team? WrenchWay is an online community dedicated to promoting and improving automotive and diesel careers. We help technicians find the best shops to work at, and we also help auto, diesel, and CTE instructors get more support from local industry. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com.